So now we're back looking at example 1 again, and we are now going to enter the ranges for example 1. So let's go to our ranges here, and I'll clear out the aces that we put in here, and we'll start with the ranges that we are going to be entering. Let's go back to our example and just kind of look at our example holistically here again, and some of our assumptions that we're going to be making here. So this is a button open versus big blind defend single raise pot. It's a 5-10 cash game, and our big blind is a break-even player who is going to understand some range concepts, but is not going to be 3-betting from the blinds enough, particularly with weaker hands. So let's start with our in-position player, which is us as the button. As I mentioned to you in the slides here, we are going to have different levels of clarity over our own ranges than we would our opponent's ranges. Now, in many cases, we're not going to know our own ranges perfectly, but we're definitely going to know our own ranges far, far, far better than we're going to know our opponent's ranges. Sometimes, in some cases, we're actually going to know our own ranges very, very well, maybe 95% accuracy or even better if you've really drilled in the pre-flop ranges that you might be playing in any given scenario into your brain. I know that there are a lot of really good ranges that are out there, which I've mentioned over in the slides, and if you've spent a lot of time studying those ranges, maybe you can accurately execute with 100% accuracy the ranges that you are playing. If that's the case, awesome. Use those ranges. Make sure that, at the end of the day, what we want to be doing here within the solver is modeling the gameplay as accurately as possible. And if you know your ranges perfectly, then use those ranges. But do make sure that you're at least honest with yourself and you're able to understand when you may be deviating from those ranges somewhat based on game conditions, based on potential players that are in certain seats. So when you do have those scenarios, make sure that you're adjusting for those as you see fit. And we'll get into some of those adjustments later on in this module when we jump into the blending section in this module, because I do have some adjustments even of my own ranges here too. So we'll start with my own ranges, and I happen to know my own ranges really, really well. My own ranges, I built them myself using equilibrium ranges as a baseline here. So this is what an equilibrium button opening range looks like. And as you can see here, there's not a ton of mixing that takes place, but there is some. So 10-5 suited mixes, Jack-8 offsuit, 9-8 offsuit, Queen-8 offsuit, King-6 offsuit, etc. But what I do here to simplify things is that I keep the overall combos or the overall frequencies constant, but I try to make the individual combination frequencies as pure as possible. I've started with this equilibrium range, which was solved using Munker Solver at a 200 big blind 9 max game as the button open. And I've adjusted them somewhat to this range here, which, as you can see, it jumps from 608, let's go back to here, just under 608 combos to 610 combos, and it's just still about 46% of range. But now everything here is pure, and I don't necessarily have to worry about trying to keep anything at kind of accurate frequencies where I know that I am always opening King-8 offsuit, but I'm never opening Queen-8 offsuit, and so on and so forth. So I've built out these ranges, and these ranges kind of represent the opening ranges that I would use from a button environment. Now, the piece of information here that I would like to incorporate, the fact that the big blind player is a break-even recreational player and is not going to 3-bet from the blinds enough, that is going to account for some deviations that I might make here, but I'm actually going to table that piece of this until we get into the blending part of this example in a few videos from now. And in that example here, we'll actually adjust this range a little bit before we actually hit solve and run the solver for the first time. But this is going to be the baseline. This is my standard button opening range, and this is going to be the baseline that we're going to start with here from the button. Now let's enter the big blinds range. And this is where it gets a little bit trickier because, as I mentioned, we are not going to have 100% clarity over our opponent's ranges here. So what does that mean? What do we actually do here in this situation? Well, I do still like to start with a baseline and work off of that based on what I think or my own perception of a player. And what I end up liking to do is I like to profile my opponents first and try to start with a baseline that might mimic what that profile actually looks like. And based on our observation here, our big blind is a break-even recreational player who is studied enough to understand range concepts at a high level, but isn't going to be pulling the trigger and 3-betting from the blinds enough. What I actually want to do is I want to start with upswing ranges because I think the upswing ranges, they're widely distributed. These are decent ranges that are used by a lot of people in the live environments. And I think they're good to model a baseline example and then work off of from there. So let's just take a look at what the upswing ranges look like here. This is what an upswing big blind call range looks like here. And just kind of to show clarification, I'll hover over this. This is what the 3-bet range looks like. This is what the call range looks like here. So if I hover over the 3-bet range, you can kind of see here that they're 3-betting a lot of these hands that are kind of up in this range right here. So this is the call range again, but you can kind of see these black hands that are not filled in. These are their hands that are 3-bet. And then there's kind of these bottom end hands that are being 3-bet as well here too. And this would be probably a decent starting point for a good professional player, right? It might be good to model a pro as actually doing this, or a really well-studied player might be playing a range like this where they're going to have some type of polarized 3-betting range. They're going to 3-bet the top of the range right up here. There's going to be some of the hands at the bottom of the range here that are going to be 3-betting as well too. I might adjust this somewhat because there are some instances where people might be 3-betting some of these hands a little bit less and including some of the suited wheel aces, but that's kind of picking nits a little bit here. Regardless, there's going to be a lot of hands that are going to be 3-bet that are not going to be in this defense range. But as we've mentioned here, the big blind is a recreational player and is not going to be 3-betting enough from the big blind, particularly with weaker hands. So what I can expect then is some of these hands that are down here at the bottom end of range are actually going to be put into calls instead. And even some of the hands at the bottom end of our 3-bet range are going to be put into calls. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start blending this a little bit, which we'll do that in the blending example to really show what this looks like here when we kind of take out some of the bottom end hands in range and then take out some of these kind of weaker hands in range here too. But what we're going to do here is we're going to kind of end this video here and start with these ranges as kind of the baseline. So our upswing ranges are going to be the baseline for our opponent. And then we'll kind of blend this a little bit here to get final ranges before we ultimately hit solve and run the solver here. So what I'm going to do here now is we're going to actually shift over into example 2 and we're going to enter ranges for our second example. So I'll see you over there. All right, so we're back in example 2 here and we're going to enter ranges. So let's go back over and clear out our ranges again. And now we're looking at this from the big blinds perspective. So we are the big blinds and I am very comfortable and familiar with my own ranges that I would utilize in this scenario here too. So as I mentioned, I've built my ranges off of equilibrium here. And this is what a big blind call range would look like at equilibrium. And as you can see, as for perspective, this is what a big blind 3-bet range looks like at equilibrium here too. This is a lot harder to implement, and I certainly am not going to be implementing this strategy here. Let's just kind of click in, just kind of show you the 3-bet ranges here, and you can kind of see that even when you start getting the ace-queen offsuit, ace-king-queen offsuit, some of these kind of like weaker hands here, like king-9 suited, 10-7 suited, king-7 suited, king-6 suited, king-5 suited, some of the weaker ace-x suited hands, the weaker suited connector hands, those types of hands. Like, there's a lot of mixing that's going on, and I'm just not going to be able to implement that properly, nor is the large majority of people here. And the converse of that is the calling range, which is, again, because those two ranges kind of work together, and that's kind of why I'm showing you both of those ranges, is because those ranges are inverses of one another, and they tend to be complementary and work together. If you know one of the ranges, you should know the other range. The call range is not going to be that easy to use as well too. So what I've done here, again, is kind of tried to keep around this frequency of a 3-bet range around 11% and a call range around 34%. And I built out this big blind defense range, which is just a little bit more than 34%. It's a lot easier for me to implement here. So you can kind of start seeing now which are the hands that I'm 3-betting. I'm 3-betting these hands at the top of the range. And then these are my 3-bet bluff hands here. Some of these suited aces, and then king-5 suited right here too. So kind of going back over to the big blind call, you can kind of see the similarities between the two. This is kind of like it's almost like reverse blending here in this case here, right? It's like going from a very blended range to a very pure range here. And this is kind of bringing things back into something that I can implement here. It's not something I would assign as my opponents, because I don't want to necessarily exclude hands out of my opponent's range. But the fact that I know that this is going to be my range here is what I can utilize here as my own out of position range here too. So we're going to use this as our range. Let's go back over the in position player here too. Now you have a few options, I think, in this case. First, you could use a pure range here in this spot here too. And I think like upswing ranges would be great to utilize in this environment. What you'll see is that, especially when you start getting into just opening ranges, there's not a lot of variability in opening ranges, and the variability is on the edge hands. But this is where I actually find equilibrium ranges just work really, really well in these spots here too. So I think it's actually fine to just kind of stick with a simple equilibrium baseline for my opponent. And when we get into blending, you'll actually kind of see that this is kind of already pre-blended. Like, we've already kind of added some blending here on some of these cusp hands. And you could do so a little bit more if you want to, but this is actually a pretty decent range to start with as a button opening range to play against, to model a professional player. So at the end of the day, I would expect that professional players are going to be closer to equilibrium ranges, particularly in opening ranges, because they tend to be the ones that are, kind of first ingrained into your system here too. So we'll kind of stick with our equilibrium ranges here as our button opening range to start with. So that reaches the end of the entering ranges component of this video. In the next video, we're going to move over to examples 3 and 4 in PioSolver, where we'll enter ranges for them.